Życzymy Państwu przyjemnej podróży.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You have just seen a teaser to our panel discussion. And these are American voters trying to vote in 17th day. They're going to vote, and today we are going to discuss this topic. What is the state of the game in the race between Ms. Harris and former President Donald Trump? My guests today are Paulina Matera, professor of the Łódź University, Marta Prochwicz-Jazowska, deputy director ECFR Warsaw, Korewa, Atlantic Council's office director in Warsaw, and the absent Łukasz Pawłowski, the author of the podcast. My name is Michał Broniatowski. I'm the editor-in-chief of TVP World. So I'm dealing with what is happening around the world, and in particular the US. In 17 days there will be presidential election in the US, and the situation is not decided yet. Taking into account the role, the position of the US, the role of the President of the US is the election of the leader in the world. So it is important for us who is going to win, and we are going to look into their traits and which choice would be better for us and which choice will be worse. The state of the game as of today is that if you trust the election forecasts, we must say that in the US, Ms. Kamala Harris is ahead of Donald Trump. New York Times says that it's 49 to 47, Economist 46.5, and Harris is above the statistical error. Washington Post says about 2 points of her being ahead of Trump. So we do different calculations, and the results of surveys are different, but they all indicate that candidates are very close to each other. In the US, as you know, it's not enough to have more votes, as Ms. Clinton learned during her presidential race. 270 electoral votes have to be collected. So in 50 states of the US, these voters will be voting. So you have to have 270 votes, 538 electoral votes. As regards election service, there are 46 states where the result is 5 points of Harris ahead of
zakończona.
Donald Trump,
I
so the competition is already decided,
rezultat jest taki, że
and the
pani
result
Harris
is that
ma
Ms. Harris
226 głosów
has
elektorskich,
226
Trump ma
electoral votes, and Trump has
219.
219
I interesujące
electoral
jest to,
votes. What is
że
interesting,
na przykład kombinacji jest bardzo dużo, bo
there are
pozostaje
different combinations
stanów,
and
tak zwanych
arrangements,
swing states,
7 swing
które
states,
w tej chwili pani Harris ma
and
przewagę 4-3.
Harris is 4-3 ratio, but the difference is below 2 percentage points, so it might change.
Mogą być to niedoszacowane, zwłaszcza w przypadku
And especially in the case of Trump,
pani Harris.
the results can be underestimated.
Przejdę do rozmowy
We are soon going to discuss these issues among our panelists. Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin.
Pani Harris ma przewagę.
Harris is ahead of Trump,
I otóż jeśli by wygrała tylko w
but
tych
not
trzech stanach,
significantly. If she wins in these 3 states, she would have 269 votes. But there is the state of Nebraska, which generates 5 voters that are part of the election panel.
Tam jest to stan,
And
który zawsze
there,
głosował.
this state of Nebraska has usually voted for Republican candidates.
Numer 2, z którego będzie
Number 2,
kandydat być może
the
demokratyczny. Więc
district
jeżeli
where the
ten
Democratic
jeden kandydat demokratyczny z
candidate
Nebraski
might be elected.
plus
If
wygra Harris
this
przynajmniej w tych trzech
candidate
stanach, Pensylwania,
is
Michigan,
elected
Wisconsin,
in Michigan, Wisconsin and
270
Nebraska,
głosów i
she will
wygrała
have 270 votes,
no to
and
będzie
she
takie
will win
zwycięstwo,
during this election.
najmniejsze z
This would
możliwych,
be the victory,
czyli 270 do
270
168 głosów. Jednym
to
słowem,
268 is the
co
ratio
możemy
at this
powiedzieć
point. So what else can be said
o wyborach,
about this
o tym,
election?
kto wygra, nie możemy
Who
nic
is going to
powiedzieć.
be the winner? We
Możemy
cannot
jedynie,
decide that yet.
Możemy
We can
jedynie,
only
spekulować,
speculate
wyrażać swoje wishful thinking,
and express
ale
our
naprawdę
wishful
do ostatniej
thinking,
chwili,
but
do,
until the last moment
mniej więcej
before the election day
godziny 5 rano
at 5 a.m. on the 6th of November,
to został
we will
nowym
still
przywódcą wolnego świata.
be waiting for the winner of the free world. It is possible that Mr. Trump can win, who tells about migrants eating cats and dogs, and we have to expel them,
Istnieją wewnętrzni wrogowie,
and there are internal
że
enemies.
należy wysłać wojsko, żeby
We have to
zrobić
send
porządek
the army to put
wyborów.
things in order
Wystarczy jeden
during the election
brutalny,
day.
jak powiedział,
At
dzień,
least one
i
brutal
wtedy się
day
wszystkich
is
bandytów
enough,
w całej
and
Ameryce
all the
zlikwiduje.
band-aids
Pomysły, no.
in the US will be
A o
liquidated
tym,
by
jakie
him.
ma pomysły na politykę
So these are his
międzynarodową, to zaraz
ideas, and
będziemy
as regards international politics, we will discuss his ideas
Więc
in a
chciałbym
moment.
Państwa
Ladies and gentlemen,
zapytać na początek,
let
dlaczego,
me ask first of
jak
all,
to się dzieje, że człowiek, który wygaduje takie rzeczy jak Trump,
how come that Trump, who says such
ma w ogóle
things,
szansę na bycie
can
prezydentem?
have a
Moja teza
chance
jest taka,
to
że
be
nie jest
elected
istotne,
president.
co on wygaduje,
So it
w jaki
might be
sposób
not
to
important
wygaduje,
what he's saying
ale
and
jednak jest
how
coś takiego,
he's
że
saying that,
50%
but
społeczeństwa
50% of
ma ochotę na niego
the
głosować,
American
chociaż nie dlatego,
population
że
want
nazywa,
to
że
vote for
przekręcamy
him,
imię
not because he
Harris,
misspells
i
Kamala
nazywa
Harris's name and
idiotką,
surname and
ale
calls her
jest
name, calls
jakiś
her an
powód,
idiot,
który Amerykanie
has to be a
mają,
reason
żeby jednak tak chcieć głosować.
so that Americans
Zacznijmy od pani.
want to vote for him. Let's start with you.
Trump jest dla
Trump,
tych wyborców amerykańskich,
for American voters, is the symbol of a conservative America. Like in the past, the US that does not undergo changes that happen in the world.
Domem dla społeczeństwa, tak jak
And
ludzie sobie
it will
wyobrażają,
be
będzie
a
o
home for
poglądach
the society that
konserwatywnych.
have
Bardzo
conservative
dużym
views.
tematem w tych wyborach
A huge
jest
topic, a huge issue during
migracja,
this election
szczególnie
is
nielegalna imigracja
migration,
i
including
takie
illegal
mocne słowa
migration in
Trumpa,
particular.
oczywiście zupełnie
And these harsh
nieuzasadnione, ale
words
one
by
przemawiają do
Trump are not
wyobraźni.
justified, but they appeal
Przytaczanie,
to human imagination.
Zbrodni, prawda, czy
So he
jakichś
mentions
zabójstw
different crimes
dokonanych przez
and killings
imigrantów, również na wyobraźnię
where
działają.
perpetrators
To jest
are
podsycane
migrants. This
Trumpa
appeals to
właśnie,
imagination,
przez
and
jego
he incites
zwolenników.
such bad
I w tym
emotions
momencie
among his
ta konserwatywna Ameryka mówi, chcemy,
supporters.
żeby
And
było
the
tak jak,
conservative
taką
America
Amerykę,
says
jaką znamy.
we
Nie
want
chcemy
to
żadnych
have
zmian.
this
Nie wiemy, co będzie,
country
jeżeli Kamala
as
Harris,
it used to be. We
której
don't want
też bardzo
changes.
liberalne poglądy
And
Trump
Kamala
przywołuje,
Harris
szczególnie z
is
przeszłości, kiedy wypowiadała się
liberal,
za
especially
tym,
her
żeby
words are
mniej
quoted
środków,
that
dawać
she
na
said
policję,
in the
prawda?
past,
To
where
jest
she
wszystko
said that
przywoływane.
they should
I to
cut
budzi
spending on
lęk
police, for
przed
example.
zmianami,
And
który
it means
dla osób o
fear
takich
of the
konserwatywnych
unknown, of the
poglądach,
future
a
among
duża część
conservative
amerykańskiego
people.
społeczeństwa jest jednak
And
konserwatywna,
many people
jest
in America have
przemawiająca.
conservative
I właśnie
views,
nieważne,
and
co on
it
mówi.
appeals to their imagination. It
Zauważyłam,
doesn't matter
że,
what he's saying, what
bardzo
Trump
zwraca
is
się uwagę,
saying.
także w mediach liberalnych, co
In
mówią,
liberal media
co mówi Kamala
outlets,
Harris, jeżeli
they
zrobi
quote
jakąś gafę.
Kamala
Czy,
Harris.
Na przykład ostatnio mówiono o
If,
Baracku Obamie, że
for example,
niepotrzebnie w
Barack
sposób taki
Obama
trochę
is
paternalistyczny
mentioned that
zwracał
he
się
is
do
paternalistic,
mężczyzn czarnoskórych,
appealing
że oni nie rozumieją
to
poważności
black
sytuacji.
men,
Na to
that
się
they
zwraca
don't
uwagę, na
understand
każde słowo,
the
natomiast to, co mówi
importance
Trump,
of
nie
the
jest już ważne. On
momentum.
jest
So
symbolem
it
tej
doesn't matter
konserwatywnej
what
Ameryki,
he's saying.
tej
He's a symbol
Ameryki,
of conservative
którą
America
większość ludzi
właśnie
chce
myślę,
that
zatrzymać.
people
jest
would
ważne,
like
co
to
on
retain.
Jednak on
I
też-
believe it is
Teraz nie mówię, że nie jest
important
ważne.
what
Nie,
he's
chodzi mi o to,
saying.
że jak się posłucha
I
jego,
mean that if you listen to Trump
wypowiedzi na wiecach, to oczywiście jest
during
cała ta
rallies, for example,
retoryka.
he uses this
of the
rhetoric
script, nazwijmy to.
of the script.
To, czego nie ma tam w tekście, który czyta
So
z promptera, ale wtedy, kiedy
he's
czyta
not
z promptera,
reading the script
to
from
mówi
the
sensowne
prompter.
rzeczy.
When he
Znaczy
reads
sensowne z punktu
words
widzenia
from
tych,
the
którzy chcą na niego
prompter,
głosować. Jakie są te rzeczy?
it
Czy
is
pan jest w
reasonable.
stanie,
Could you please
powiedzieć
comment
o
on
programie,
his
coś pozytywnego
program,
o programie?
agenda, anything positive
do
can
mnie,
be
tak?
said? It's a question to me, right?
Znaczy, koniec końcem świat się
Finally,
zmienia szybko i świat
we can
jest
say that the world is
skomplikowany
changing
niż
fast.
czas
It is
był.
much more
I
complex than
fenomen
it
Donalda
used to
Trumpa
be,
nie
and
różni się
Donald
specjalnie
Trump's
od
phenomenon
podobnej
is
sytuacji,
not
którą
that
mamy w
different
zachodnim
from
demokratycznym,
other
że jest pewna grupa
democratic
ludzi, która czuje
states,
się
that there is a
niewygodnie
group
z tymi
of
szybkimi
people
zmianami.
who
I Trump jest
oppose
takim
these
ich
fast
bohaterem,
changes,
ich
and
obrońcą.
Trump is the
Ktoś taki,
hero,
który na przykład
is the
jakby
defender.
robił wywiad z Bloombergiem,
From
mówi, że to wy, elity,
interview with
jesteście
Bloomberg,
głupi,
it
jesteście,
was
nie
said that
rozumiecie
you,
tego,
the
że właśnie
elites,
taryfy są
are
dobre,
stupid,
huk, trach, mamy
and
jedną
we
taką
have
rzecz,
to
którą
do
wszyscy
this and
rozumieją,
that.
ten
This is
podstaw-
something that everyone
zrobimy, że będzie
understands.
drożej Chińczykom, żeby
For
tutaj
example, it will be
sprzedawać,
more
bo
expensive
dawniej
for
potężnie
the
sprzedawali
Chinese
kawałki
to sell
samochodów,
here
potem
because
myśmy je
they
po prostu
used
składali.
to
To przecież
sell
każdy
parts
może
of the
zrobić. Nie jest to
cars.
takie
Everyone can do
skomplikowane.
it.
Co wy
It's
tutaj
not
ludzi
complex.
okłamujecie? Ja,
Why are you lying to
biznesmen,
people?
pokażę,
I'm a
zrobię to
businessman.
łatwo,
I'm going
Podobno
to
z
show
imigrantami.
the
Nie mają tutaj,
same
są tutaj nielegalnie,
goes
siat,
about
trach, wyrzucamy
migrants.
i
We
koniec,
don't
prawda?
need them. We expel them and we get rid of them.
Znaczy, to nie jest
And
paradoksalnie, ale
paradoxically,
im
not
bardziej
maybe
mówi zwariowane
paradoxically,
rzeczy,
the
tym
crazier
bardziej ci, którzy
things
czują
he
się
says,
niewygodnie z tymi zmianami,
the
mówią,
more
że, to
those
jest
who
właśnie nasz
oppose
obrońca,
changes
on się
believe
tych
that
elit
he
nie
is
boi,
our
on się niczego nie boi,
defender.
on
He's
powie,
not
jak jest
afraid of the elites.
im
He's going
więcej
to
mówi takie
say
rzeczy, tym lepiej,
truth,
prawda?
and the more he
To oczywiście
says,
pewną
the
grupę
better.
wyborców odstrasza.
And of course, it frightens
Ale
the
czy
other group of voters, but does he frighten more people than he attracts people who will learn about it during the election day?
No, he refers to the term peace through strength. We are strong, we are powerful, and that's it. And also, if we don't spend money on Ukraine, if we don't send the military men to places other than when it's necessary, then the stupid elites who steal from you try to convince you to spend money on Ukraine. I will finish this dispute in 24 hours. I'm communicating well with Putin. Well, it's a populistic approach, and it's oversimplification of complicated things. He claims it's simple, uncomplicated, while it is complicated. We are looking for a secret treasure somewhere in that complicated rhetoric. When he claims he would finish war in 24 hours and swish-swash, well, it's a populist slogan. But behind the slogan, which is quite populistic, there has to be something which outside, beyond this conservative approach of the society makes him attractive. Makes him an attractive candidate. So do you see any other elements of the plan or his intentions? And also, does he even mention that in his speeches? And why does that appeal to people, to half of the American population? Well, I believe, as my colleague mentioned, the simplification is the key element that reaches people. In this complicated and dangerous world that we live in, where globalization became, in fact, a tool which is treated instrumentally against us, which is used this way. And this growing tendency of populistic approach, I would relate that to the dependencies between different countries which are now perceived as dangerous. There's a growing number of wars globally, and Trump is able to present this to American people in such a way that we do not have to worry about the other parts of the world. It's nothing new in American politics. This is actually as old, as long as the history of the American of the United States. There has always been a fight struggling between isolationism. So the United States are not just a policeman. There is a balance and conflict between representatives of the two opposing views. And they have always been there in the history of the US. And there is one more thing I'd like to add. The phenomenon of Trump in the last years can be linked to the role of the United States in global conflicts such as Iraq and Afghanistan. Americans are tired of the wars. They no longer want to take part in such conflicts. They treat them as never-ending wars that they are not reasonable. There is no purpose for American nation to be involved. And Trump and his supporters emphasize that in Trump's times there were no new wars. The war in Ukraine would not have started was Trump elected the president. So in the American society, among his voters, there are many war veterans, and that's a social group that is able to influence, to have a big impact on the effect of the elections. And with regard to what you said earlier, you said that we'll know on the 6th of November. Well, the counting of the votes will take 1 week or more. Especially when we have a neck-and-neck tie, a very close proximity between the two candidates. This will take much longer. Well, yes, that's a fact, especially when it comes to mailed votes. But the ones that are counted on site, this may form the ground, from the basis for the media to announce the winner much sooner. We'll see. If that's not on the 6th of November in the morning, we might keep biting our nails for a couple more days. But as you mentioned, the struggle and the rally about the final decision who the President of the United States will be. Well, these will be groups of tens or even less than thousands of voters. These may be either war veterans or, for instance, women from Philadelphian suburbs who had the decisive vote and influence on Trump's failure 4 years ago, or the black community who were scolded by Obama recently. Obama claimed that a person of color may not vote for somebody other than Kamala. Well, the estimated number of demographic groups who may affect the outcome of the elections are around 20. For instance, a group in Nebraska or other places. They may have influence on who becomes the President of the United States. So, the question that I wanted to ask now is of a more general nature. Well, as I was preparing to this meeting, I read in one of the dailies that in 1987 Joe Biden had to withdraw from running in pre-elections because he quoted a Labour Party leader from the so there was a suspicion that he committed plagiarism, and for that reason he had to withdraw from running in the elections. And now there are 3 pending litigations, at least one threatening with imprisonment, 2 impeachments voted by the House of Representatives, one prison sentence, one convicted. He's convicted, and he's still running for president, and he has pretty equal chances to be the next resident in the White House. So I don't want to phrase this question like what happened to the world in the last 40 years, but it's tempting. So what happened to America? Let's keep Łódź out of the picture. But what happened in America in the last 40 years so that the standards went so much down? There's no shame. Well, there is lack of trust in the elites. People don't mind Trump's warning of being a one-day dictator. You cannot be a dictator in one day. You can either be a dictator or be a defender. But Trump wants to be a knight of revenge. he wants to be people's defender. So you see, there have been changes which occurred globally, and they affected the states most of all. So they see Trump as a savior. And there's some positives there. Some people believe he is a better president in terms of leading the American economy. Well, the ideas are good, but there is no money to support them because he wants to reduce taxes. They believe he will be a better president. He will save them. He will be their man. And to me, it's quite surprising. We could try to make an analysis, a psychological analysis, and understand why people think this way, because here we are not experts to decide on that. But the United States were built around the concept of freedom. It's something that unites the nation. There are different ethnical groups, people of different backgrounds, different views, different beliefs. It's quite a differentiated society. But in what Trump says, the concept of freedom is missing. He goes towards enslaving. What Kamala Harris said, he actually wants to suspend Constitution. Kamala Harris said it's unthinkable for Americans. So I believe the faith that it can be different, and the fact that people feel they are victims of the new processes taking place, it makes them blind. So they believe a person who wants to destroy the fundamental concept of the state, which is freedom, is their candidate. Well, I would like to look for this, go back to the concept of searching for a treasure. Some voters still have not made their mind, and some say, well, I had a better life in Trump's time. In the times of Biden, we have war, everything is more expensive. Well, now we can say that in the States, people live in media bubbles. There is right-wing media, there is left-wing media, and people watch their media. It's not just that they are lied to, but some questions are simply not asked. For instance, a good example was Kamala's interview at Fox News. And one of the questions was, why do you support the concept of spending tax money into sex change surgeries for illegal migrants? Because he mentioned, she mentioned she would support that. And her response, as a shocker, was, how can you ask such a question? Well, it's American people's money that is meant to be used for a very expensive procedure, which is not a life-saving procedure, and that disturbs many people. It makes them angry. So for a president of the entire country who is dreaming of uniting the entire country, she should be able to respond to such question. She should answer in a way like, I will abide the law. But then again, she has influence on what the law is. I want to mention yet another example which shows the other side of the story. It was when Kamala Harris said that Trump mentioned internal enemies. And then, who was a journalist, he showed a film in which he cut out this controversial part. So viewers of Fox News would not see Trump's controversial statements, they will only see the nice parts. And during today's meeting, we are talking about things that, well, it's actually pointless to convince Fox News viewers to vote on Trump, because they will vote for Trump. And everything will be resolved or decided on the level of small demographic groups of sometimes less than 10,000 people. And they are the ones who may decide who will be elected. So there remains a question of how can we vote, or how can they vote? And now I will contradict myself, because maybe he does sell some treasure. But then again, the guy who sells the treasure, who has the treasure, is a convicted felon. So he is endangered of being imprisoned. He is a liar, and so is his deputy president. He claims he won the elections 4 years ago. So what happened to this sensitivity to truth and to good taste in the United States?
Three things. First of all, I'm not going to go into detail social media and spread of misinformation and disinformation. Second, when you listen to Trump's voters who take the floor in media outlets, and journalists address them and want to learn why they're voting for Trump, it means that they don't know anything about his manifesto, about his program. This is typical of all voters around the world. Only 0.5% of people reads manifestos. But comparing to other manifestos, Trump's manifesto is really frightening. So this conviction that he's going to be a better president from the point of view of the economic situation in the US, it means that they focus on it only, and they don't care about how he is going to achieve this purpose of changing the US. So this program is already developed by NGOs. One of them is Heritage Foundation, who has a draft called the US 2050, and former representatives of the administration, Trump's administration, Trump's previous administration, they created a document which is more than 700, almost 900 pages long, and he is describing the way he is going to change the US, and these are deep changes, drastic changes which reflect mistrust in the elite. So they want to change the entire administration, 40,000 people who would be dismissed, and they will not be able to save the US. What do I mean? During the first presidential term of Trump, this administration was extremely important, so that some of the changes were not introduced. No one has acquainted themselves with 700 pages of this document, so voters know nothing about this program. Next, he changed the Republican Party, at least temporarily. The Republican Party, and it's not only Trump's phenomenon, he is not the only reason that this party has changed, and he might be elected the president. The problem is the Republican Party, which is shaped by him, unlike Kamala Harris, a candidate who is the outcome, the product of her party. Trump is a phenomenon of his Republican Party. He is such a strong player, such an influential player, that many people in the GOP, in the Republican Party, were forced to support him, although they didn't want to do that initially. And this is a huge huge problem. The party has been transformed, and his words are heard around the world. And, for example, funding is one of the reasons. And they're afraid that if he is elected, they won't have enough funds, even if they believe he is crazy. And they tell that behind closed doors where there are no TV cameras shooting the replies. GOP, Grand Old Party, the Republican Party, that has a huge tradition, including democratic conservative tradition and state-forming tradition, the tradition of building statehood. And suddenly the party is changed under the influence of one person, a strong player. The structure of this party, as Professor Snyder says, they have a fascist right here. And it is amazing that something was done to Republicans. It will be analyzed in the future. What are the reasons for that? We won't dwell on that because we're discussing the election, that we know nothing for sure as regards the outcome of this presidential election. Not knowing the result, we have to be prepared, the world has to be prepared to face Donald Trump as a potential president. And let me remind you, he is the commander-in-chief of the largest army in the world, and he has huge resources to support or withdraw his support to countries that are under threat. And this is a threat for the world. I'm speaking about the conflict in Ukraine and the situation as regards Israel's interventions. So there are a lot of threats in this world. So the question arises, what are going to be the consequences? Let's imagine Trump is elected president. What are the results of his victory? The results for the world, for Europe, for Poland, and for Ukraine. A very broad question. Let me mention that unpredictability of Trump is his worst trait. In international relations, this is a problem, and if the head of the superpower is unpredictable, it is not good for us. It's not good news. His first presidential term, we know about his behavior. He mentioned that NATO is not needed and that the US shouldn't contribute so much to NATO, but then in reality he supported NATO. And in each budget, the eastern flank was also supported by him. And we are not sure he is going to continue such an approach. Speaking of Ukraine, in the debates, Trump didn't mention he wants Ukraine to win. He just said he wanted the war to end. Can you dwell on that? It means that he will promote peace, meaning talking to Putin. He mentioned he admired Putin, and he will invite President Zelensky and President Putin, and they will reach a peace agreement, which would mean for Ukraine to accept occupation of some of the territories, because Russia doesn't want to annex the entire Ukraine, but we actually don't know what Putin wants and how far he can go.
Trump, zaczęłam mówić o Woodwardzie,
I mentioned
który ujawnił,
about
że
outward,
relacje z
and
Putinem,
he revealed that
kiedy nie był prezydentem,
relations with Putin when he was not the president, these were friendly relationships, they were nice to each other. COVID test kits were sent to Russia, to Putin, and he wanted to do it in a clandestine manner. But this fact was revealed, and the approach of the US will change, speaking of financing support for Ukraine and sending weapons, arms to Ukraine. And the narrative will change as regards the conflict in Ukraine, and it might become the meta-narrative. It is a narrative that is going to be promoted, that Russia has the right to snatch some of the territory of Ukraine. And if the US does not leave NATO under Trump, although I mentioned unpredictability of Trump, NATO will not be as strong as it is today, and Putin is going to test how far he can go. Will the alliance react to Putin's acts? He's going to test NATO. And this is dangerous. Not only Ukraine, there are other conflicts, other problems all over the world. And we could mention China. Let us focus on the most interesting conflicts, most interesting for our audience. So, domestic policy in Poland. What is Trump's influence on the situation in Poland? I started thinking about Ukraine.
No, działa. Sytuacji wewnętrznej w Polsce.
Okay, so domestic situation in Poland and other Western democratic countries. Poland is part of Western democratic world. So populist forces will treat it as a stimuli for them to speak up. For example, he looks at the relationships among the countries in terms of personal relationships with the leaders of these countries. For example, that he met with President Duda several times, and he believes they have a good relationship with Poland. It is good now, but it may change in the future. Trump, during the press conference, can say, we really like your president, but we don't like your prime minister. So we might face such situations. But frankly speaking, how did it start? It was not President Duda who went to see President Trump in America. It was Trump who looked at his allies and he said, okay, Poland is my friend, so let's start with Poland. There are different problems in terms of international politics, but the first Trump's presidential term was a kind of naivety. He didn't count to be the winner, so he just tested different things. I don't like Merkel, for example, because Trump has always had problems with the women. Oh, I wouldn't say that. No, he really has a lot of problems with women. And now, against this backdrop, he's a bit critical and wants to take revenge. And in 2016, he didn't really take care of this party, especially in the international politics. Trump's movement is more focused on the domestic politics. He's not focused on international relations. In certain areas he might be sensible, but it would be more difficult because all the reasonable people in international arena don't want to bet on him because he shouldn't be elected president in the first place. He's not very reliable as well. After a meeting with Putin, he might say, I don't like this guy now, I'm not going to support him. There is the Trump's plan for Ukraine signed by Mike Pompeo. It's not a plan for Ukraine. Actually, it is a plan developed by other people who want to show it to Trump as a plan for Ukraine. Not only Pompeo signed it, but there are people party operatives who are not international relations experts, but they have good stance and position in the party. So it might turn out that Trump doesn't like Europe and doesn't like Europeans, and he perceives Ukraine as a whole. It's not like Trump specific. Many Americans perceived Europe in such a way as a whole, not divided into countries. And there are opportunities in China, in Asia, and in Ukraine. They always ask us to send some money on defense, and only Poland is good, and it's not enough from the Trump's point of view. And even if he claims that Poland spends enough money on arms and defense, but it wouldn't help in the context of Ukraine. Speaking of Ukraine, I'm not going to go into detail. Anything is possible, unfortunately. Anything that may indicate that it's going to go worse because Trump doesn't understand the seriousness of the situation. He's like a real estate developer from New York. Why are you conflicting over this piece of land? His frame of reference is that you could build a beautiful hotel there. He doesn't understand that it's fight for freedom, for major values. So let us sit down and discuss it.
And the last thing I want to say about men, it may be controversial, but it's a personal aspect. Trump and his circle doesn't like Zelensky because Zelensky is a true man and Trump and his folks are fake men. There are smart guys who wish they were real men, but Zelensky stands for courage, responsibility, everything Trump is lacking. So now I lost any opportunity to play any role in the future administration, which I hope will not happen. Well, but you're definitely running. Well, let's talk about places in the world which are truly affected by who is in power in Washington, and that's Middle East. Would you be able to comment on that? Well, let me say three things before about the consequences for us. I believe we should differentiate between those three. One is the consequences of Trump's foreign policy, and number one is military support for Ukraine. Number two is forcing Ukraine to potential peace talks. And number three is NATO. So these are three categories and we need to approach them independently, because in all three we are able a little bit to foresee what Trump's actions will be. And our reactions will also have an effect on Trump. It's not like Europe has no say. The way we react, whether to Trump or Harris, if we are able to come up with a common plan for Ukraine, for NATO, and a plan for potential peace talks, all that has a gigantic influence on both administrations. So this will lead the way. And that's a key thing to realize, that We are not here just as passive observers, passive entities who are just sitting and waiting for the outcome of the election, which is their internal thing. You said it was our thing. Well, it's their domestic decision, but we will experience the consequences, but we have agency, we as Poland and we as Europe. Now the consequences for the Middle East. In case of both candidates, they will be quite similar. The United States support Israel, and it seems that Trump, while throwing some strong words about supporting Israel. Now, about the situation, what happened on the 7th of October in Israel and the Gaza war, Trump has not taken any has not made any direct statements. So he didn't say, yes, Israel, go, move forward. No, he avoided any direct comments, and that's meaningful. And we did not hear any compassion either to any words directed at the victims of the Gaza attacks. But he may have other approaches. He may look at that conflict in different categories. So he may go beyond supporting Israel. But Harris is also interesting. She's a product of her party. So we might expect her policy will be exactly what her party's policy is. But there's one nuance. She, in her statement, is more empathetic. She shows more empathy to victims on both sides. But, well, now we are facing many more victims in Gaza. So the United States are counting on the fact that killing the Hezbollah leader will, and now Hamas leader, so the key leaders in those terrorist organizations will open the door to reach peace. So Israel understood that's the moment, or Netanyahu needs to understand that that's a moment when he can tell the Israeli people, we succeeded something, and let's make peace now. And this is how the United States perceive that conflict, and they will use that. Okay, so we smoothly moved on to a scenario where Kamala wins. So what if she does? She does win the elections. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for Europe, for the Middle East, for the world, for NATO, for America-China relationship? So let's focus on the most important elements. Just pick one geographic area and respond. So what does it mean? Kamala Harris, they say, is very enigmatic in her statements about foreign policy. Well, the United States foreign policy tends to continue more than change. So whenever there is a change, it will be brought by Trump in power, which is not certain anyway. Kamala Harris emphasizes, for now it's for the purposes of the campaign, that she is not Biden. She is now a candidate. She does not want to be compared to Biden. But on the basis of her statements, there will be a lot of continuity in her actions. So she will continue to provide support for Ukraine, for NATO. She will support the alliance. Now, in China, she wants to maintain the rivalry or even to strengthen the commercial war, but still maintain a dialogue. She does not want to eliminate American and Chinese commercial or economic relations. For a year now, intense discussions have been conducted between the states and China. They keep visiting one another. So we may expect that to be continued. Also, the same relates to the Middle East. They want to achieve peace, if possible. It seems that the United States' influence on Israel is limited, and they will be striving to convince Netanyahu that Hamas has been defeated, which is not true, but certain events can be used to summarize that in this light, in this context. They will want to maintain strong alliances with Asian countries, and these will be the priorities. And NATO will be business as usual.
Tak jest. Przez jakiś czas słyszałem takie
Well,
interesujące podejście do tego.
I heard about an interesting approach of comparing Biden and Harris, and it said that Biden is good from the European perspective. He was called the last of the Europeans, not in the sense of the skin color or his ethnicity, but his worldview was formed as a chief of International Affairs Commission in the Senate. And Harris is somebody who comes from California, who has parents from India and Jamaica, so it's mostly Asia. So two things are important here. First, the main advisor for international affairs, just like in case of Trump, they are not a team. So they are not, advisors are not Trump's team, and there is no Harris team, because she was recently made a candidate. But she has an advisor, Philip Warden, who will be her advisor, and he is a 100% transatlantic supporter, and he is interested in Western European matters, not East European matters. But what I'm getting at is, on the one hand, Biden has a different upbringing, and his worldview was formed by the Cuban crisis and the Vietnam War. And these events make you careful. Now, for a change, Harris was formed during the first Russian aggression in Ukraine in 2014, and that gave her quite a different lesson. She was not formed during the Cold War. She may be more willing to take a different approach towards Russia, which is more towards breaking the old rules. So she may consent to remote missiles. Well, she will approach it in a different way. That country is weaker than us. That country broke international law, and this guy is a cunning guy. So now about China. I'm not sure everyone in China perceives or understands the great consensus that China is their opponent, their enemy, and it's both right and left wing approach. Their approaches are somewhat different in the sense that Harris understands that the states need Europe to achieve something reasonable in Asia, and Trump doesn't. Now, Middle East, there is the left wings want peace with the Palestinians. The right wing is more right wing. So why Trump's people like the Middle East? It's because Israel can go somewhere and bomb some places, and then the states would not have to invest money in such initiatives. Well, I want to summarize that it doesn't matter if it's Trump or Harris. One thing was quite reasonable by Marta. Europe needs to remember that we have agency. So even if Trump wins, it's not game over, it's game on. So our role will be even more important, and we will be even more necessary. So please continue on your thought about the agency. Yes, as a matter of principle, I will consent with the concept that Kamala Harris will in a way continue Biden's presidency, but we need to think about Ukraine. Biden formed a slogan for as long as it takes, but that slogan was necessary for the coalition of Ukraine supporting countries to use it as their slogan. What does it mean for as long? Well, we see that countries experience an increasing fatigue with spending money on Ukraine. What it takes, well, we know what it takes. We know what we need. So, well, he said once as long as we can. Well, that's more reasonable. That's more true. So if Biden believes that the Ukrainian war cannot be won, and that's the assumption Americans relied on when preparing their support, then this slogan should be redefined. So if Biden still ran for elections and he won the elections, he would probably, sooner or later, lead to peace conversations around Ukraine. And that's what President Harris, potential President Harris, will continue. Unfortunately, she will also tie deliveries of military equipment with bringing Ukraine to a negotiation table. And I agree that the long-distance missiles can give advantage to Ukraine and have a better starting position at the negotiation table. But if there is a willingness to help Ukraine and to give them that sort of military equipment, to have a better starting point, it does not mean that it does not lead to negotiations. This will lead to negotiations. And the last comment, I believe it's an important one. When we look at the situation, we need to realize that perhaps it's President Biden, so the most transatlantic supporter. He is the aberration. It's not Trump. The United States, since Obama, focused on Indo-Pacific region, and that structural, demographic, economic, and worldview changes, which are of long-term nature. We as Europeans and as Poles, we have the possibility to do something now so that Ukraine's and Poland's position in NATO is stronger. But first of all, as Europeans and as Poles in Europe, it's a moment for us to realize that we need a strategy towards the States. It's not about redefining the transatlantic relationship, but we need to develop a strategy to deal with the States. And Europe should have its own money to buy weapons from the States, because that will engage Americans, regardless of who the president is, whether it's Trump or Harris. And that is a strategic aspect which was raised by Radosław Sikorski in his recent speech in Sopot. It's Europe who needs to find the billions, and there are few of those who are interested, and there are actually some people who will defend from such solutions, starting from Orban through Germans who don't want to consent to finance those purchases together. Well, we could continue this conversation for a much longer time. Unfortunately, we have to finish now.
Ja na sam koniec zrobię
And
takie głosowanie. Kto
I would
by-
like to make a little poll. Who will win the elections? Trump? If you believe it will be Trump, raise your hand.
Nie zgodzę się, ja myślę, że Harris.
I disagree. I believe it will be Harris.
Nie, ale to
No.
mówiliśmy o tym, czego się
Well,
boimy.
we talked about our concerns and fears and then about our
Od samego
hopes.
początku mówiłem, że
From the very beginning, I made it clear that Harris is the runner-up. But we will soon, we will not know quickly if she makes it. But let's make a quick poll, quick voting. Trump?
Ja widzę, że tutaj przewaga jest jednak
Well, I
myślenia
see
zachciankowego.
there is a lot of wishful thinking here in this room. You are all afraid this will be Harris. You all hope it will be Harris.
Lepiej, żeby
It's better
myśleć.
to be realistic. Well, thank you very much.
Zapraszamy na inne
And please join other meetings.
Jedzą kanapki z kawiorem.
Nadzwyczajna kasa.
Obrażanie dziennikarz telewizji polskiej.
Chodzi o działania polityczne.
Przygotowanie ofiar dla pedofilów.
Für Deutschland.
TVP Info. Włącz się na nowo.
Radość, nadzieja, życie, wyzwanie, pasja, pamięć, zaufanie, pokój, jedność. Słowa tworzą świat. Polskie Radio. Źródło wiarygodnych informacji.
Plany biznesowe powstają z marzeń. Dlatego nie ma dwóch takich samych firm. Jedni chcą działać na całym świecie. Innym cały świat mieści się w dłoni. Sukces biznesu to nie tylko jego wielkość, ale też szczęście, jakie przynosi ludziom. PKO Bank Polski.
Uwielbiam szycie w sieci. Wczoraj podszyłem się pod wnuczka, wieczorem uszyłem intrygę na apce randkowej, a dziś planuję grubymi nićmi szyte oszustwo z promocją. Tak się szyje.
Na oszustów są sposoby. Zapoznaj się z poradami ekspertów na niedajsiepodszyć.pl.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Polskie Radio.
Jedynka.
Rodzina spółek Pelion to 12 tysięcy osób pracujących w ponad 300 spółkach w Polsce, Szwecji, Wielkiej Brytanii i na Litwie. Jesteśmy liderem w branży ochrony zdrowia. Od 1990 roku dbamy o długość i jakość życia. Pracować z nami możesz w jednym z 7 obszarów.
Dziś Nowy Jork, jutro Londyn. Za chwilę Paryż, Warszawa, Berlin. Na całym świecie kultura pulsuje rytmem. Wystarczy tylko włączyć dwójkę. Dwójka, Polskie Radio. Jesteś na miejscu.
Zapraszamy do Trójki. Od nowa.
Trójka. Program Trzeci Polskiego Radia.
Czy wytrzymasz klockowe tortury? Ze stoickim spokojem. Czy w twardych negocjacjach zachowasz zimną krew? Czy poddasz się dobrowolnej eksmisji ze swojego łóżka? Brawo! Test na obecność serca zaliczony. To znaczy, że ty też możesz być rodzicem zastępczym. Dowiedz się jak na testserca.pl.